Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm Matt Rosato, and this is the fourth episode in our series of table talks with Advanced Behavioral Health's DEI Committee. Last time we discussed what it's like to be Middle Eastern in the United States, and today our topic is going to be what it's like being in the LGBTQ plus community in the United States. How this works is I will pose a question to the group, and then anyone can respond at any time. The first question today will be, when did you know you were a part of the LGBTQ plus community?
Hi there, good morning. My name is Tamara Castillo. Sometimes I go by T. When I actually knew that I was a part of the LGBTQ plus or queer community, depends on how you would like to say, I actually didn't really know that I was a part of it. I kind of started to have like an idea of what I was feeling for same sex when I was in my 20s. Um, but I have to say that I feel as though I had these feelings for the same sex gender since I was in second grade. I just didn't really have the knowledge then or the resources or anybody really around me to be like, oh, what you're feeling, it's okay. It means you're gay. It means that you just love who you want to love. So I was a late bloomer, if that's something that is to be said.
And to piggyback on that, I'm Paula Namoga. I agree with you. I was kind of in the same range. I was really young when I noticed that I started having feelings for the opposite or for the same gender. But then when I was in middle school, I didn't really know it was a community. Like, I just thought it was something normal, I guess, until, people started being mean. But yes, I'd say I'd probably about middle school is when I really realized that it was a community, but I was a lot younger before when I realized it as well.
So I'll go next. I'm Megan Riley. I was pretty young. I was in elementary school and started having feelings for the same gender. There was a lesbian couple that moved in down the street when I was about 11, and I remember just being like fascinated by them, like overly fascinated. But I think I was probably 13 when I put the word lesbian to it, and I remember that just being very scary, like putting the word lesbian to me, because I was not okay with it. Like I knew that's who I was, but I was not okay with it. But that was the first time I like labeled myself. So.
I think it's really interesting how this question has been like slightly different than the questions we've done before, because you asked Matt, like, when did we first know we were part of the community versus when did we first know we were queer? And I think those are actually kind of different questions. And I think like for me personally, that's a really relevant question. I think community, like queer community or LGBT community, has been a huge part of like my understanding of like my own queerness and like what that means. I don't think I would be queer in the same way or even as deeply if it hadn't been for the communities that I feel a part of. I think for me personally, like I was having all kinds of experiences of like attraction and sort of like sexual interaction with people of all genders. Like, I mean, I think since, probably like 8th grade, but I don't think that I like recognized myself really or started identifying like as queer until I actually had community. And so those like two things are really linked for me. And that was kind of in college. I played rugby, which I think is kind of like a funny stereotypical thing, where some people like come out, and I feel like I'd been queer for a long time, but having a space in which queerness was kind of celebrated and also just like totally fine and normal and not really like a thing. I think that was, when I started to really understand how important a queer identity was to me and how relevant the community was to me. And I think it's really interesting too, like the different words we use, because words are so politicized. And I think particularly the term queer has been somewhat of a political term, because in the past it has been used to like as a slur, and then now it's sort of reclaimed and people use it really positively. Yeah, totally. Like I would say my primary identity is queer. And that doesn't really say a lot about who I'm with or who I'm attracted to. It's about my identity. And I think speaking to it being bigger than about who you're attracted to or who you're with, I think queerness also sort of has this idea of like, let's get rid of boxes, right? Like people are complex, gender is complex, attraction is complex, and maybe we don't know how to actually fit what we're interested in or who we are into really small boxes like woman or lesbian or, you know, whatever. And I think that's also a really important part of the word queer for me. Like, I don't want to have to be really specific about that stuff, because who cares? And also maybe it'll change. And again, like my queerness feels really, really connected to my community and who I am and where I feel safe within communities, rather than like my, I think, attraction and sexuality or gender or something like that. So sorry, that was long-winded, but yeah.
Sorry, you got some snaps in there.
So for me, my story basically, I think I felt attraction for the same sex back when I was like probably in elementary school. However, I didn't really pay much mind to it because it wasn't publicized as it is like now, and it wasn't really accepted, and I didn't know the terminology until like I got older, obviously, and I started to make the connections and kind of look back at my life. So fast forward, and I just dated guys, and then I got married to one. And during that relationship, before even marrying him, I was, I definitely had attraction and interactions with some females. But then that, I got married. Within my relationship, we had a little bit of an argument, and I blurted out like, hey, I don't really care if I'm with the next person, guy or girl. And I said some stuff, and I think that's when I realized it started to become somewhat problematic, in the sense that that's the only thing that he was focused on about my attraction towards females. And then ever since we got a divorce and everything, it was basically, I would hear derogatory comments about my status or my orientation based on from other people who like either knew us or knew me or what have you. And they would say, oh, you're only this because you don't have like, you never had the right man, or you're only this because you're just experimenting, or you're only this because it's just a phase, or you're only into girls because, you haven't found the exact person for you, or you've had a bad experience with a man. And I'm like, no, it is who I am. And you just kind of have to accept that. And if you can't accept it, then you can leave. But I think I really truly identified it when, I started developing feelings for this particular girl while I was still in my marriage. And then, things didn't progress the way that I wanted them to. And then afterwards, it kind of helped me open my eyes a little bit more to my accepting myself as part of being in that community. And afterwards, like I because I was making a lot of excuses, I think, for myself when I realized those feelings were legitimate. And I didn't know why I was like making the excuses. I just felt like, okay, well, I'm still married, so I shouldn't have any type of feelings for anybody else. But I also was like, are you gay really, or are you not? Like, I didn't really know. And then once things progressed, I was just like, oh yeah, you definitely are. So like, okay, just accept it and move on with it. So I felt very proud of that experience that I went through. And then even now, it's just, there's still obviously a lot of comments aimed at me, particularly because, people know I was married with a guy. And when I came out as bi, although I'm not bi right now, when I did come out as bi and tried to give myself a label, I even got like negativity from the community in itself, because it's like, oh, well, why don't you just pick a side? And I'm like, so now even within the own community, I was getting like backlash, and I'm just like, okay, so I'm just gonna go without a label because I'm attracted to females. I'd rather be with a female, but like, but I'm not gonna give myself a label because I do feel, same as Nina, that things are ever changing. As far as labels, and I don't like to be tied down to a label at all, which I kind of feel like some of our clients do experience. And I've heard from a lot of my clients that they really don't like labels for various reasons, but that's kind of where I stand on that issue in general.
Yeah, I
Just-
feel like very strongly that, go ahead, I'm sorry, Matt.
No, please, Megan, you go.
So I really hate the biphobia within our community, but I also feel very strongly that nobody should label you except for yourself. Like, labels are for you. So whatever you feel is the best label for you, it should be your label if you want one, but you don't have to have one if you don't want to. And I feel very strongly with that personally and professionally, and that's something that I've talked to clients about as well.
I'm curious now, is the bisexual phobia, like, is that always been a part of the community? Because I thought being bisexual was a major part of the community.
Yeah, a lot of lesbian women are afraid to date bisexual women, and there's this like fear that they'll go back to men.
Oh, okay.
And that's something I experienced. I mean, I was married before to a man, and the entire time him and I were in the relationship, he was worried I was going to leave him for a woman. And then I marry my wife, and I love her to death, but now she knows I'm not going anywhere, but she always makes the comment that she's scared I'm going to leave her for a man. So it's like, you can't win either way.
Yeah, it's never been an issue I've had. For me, it's always been, as long as you can be and committed to me, I don't really care what your label is, so how you identify.
I think it's also like fair. It happens a lot in minority communities where like you are a part of like there are fewer of you, and so like you don't want to lose people in a sense, right? Because it's already hard enough to be part of a minority, and there is like this fear that you're going to lose people. I think that you see that in a lot of different sort of like places and situations. I also think that intersectionality like plays a really important part in people's understanding of their own queerness and how other people see them, because I think the dominant narrative of what it looks like to be queer or gay has been like a pretty white one, and so people who are not white, who are also queer, like don't always, not that even white queer people have very many like figureheads or role models, but I think people who are not white have even fewer. And so I think it might look a little different, like depending on how your culture engages with gender or how your culture engages with romanticism, right? And so I think it's really complicated. I mean, I think biphobia is something that's really, really complicated, and people who are bi or pansexual in general or somewhere not on either end of the spectrum of straight or gay, like do have to deal with people on both sides kind of being like, no, like, but really you're one of those things, or you just haven't figured it out yet, or to Benita's point, like you just haven't found the right guy, or you just haven't found the right girl, so I think that there is like a lot of really messed up narrative that is just about getting to decide for people rather than themselves. And I think kind of what I'm hearing everybody say is like, okay, no, but actually somebody just gets to decide for themselves, and that might change, and that might look really different depending on who you are,
And I want to speak on what you said about the cultural aspect of it, because I think even when you are a minority and then you have a double minority back with it, homosexuality in Hispanic culture, especially growing up, was very much of a no-no. And it's still, even though it's super accepted and there are plenty of Hispanic people that are gay, it's just depending on the age bracket that you're dealing with or you're interacting with, it's very much of a big no-no. And there's still so many derogatory terms and so many like feelings about it that a lot of people within the Hispanic community do not openly come out. I mean, I have a friend who she's in her 30s, and it took her probably a very, very long time to come out. She came out to all of us as her friends first, and I think it was probably late 20s that she came out, and it took her an additional like 5 or 6 years to come out to her parents and actually say those things, because she was just so scared of that backlash from her own community. And even now, even that it's widely publicized and widely accepted, especially in westernized civilization, I have clients who are of African American descent, and one who's particularly just very African, but she she just won't come out yet. Like, and she's just absolutely refusing because of her background. And she actually has experienced and heard some really aggressive things from her parents, particularly like the males in her family, where she's legitimately scared to even say anything. And she would love to be a part of some of the stuff that ABH has offered to her, but she can't yet. It's not comfortable. So, but she's very open in sessions, and it's a wonderful thing to actually have to engage with her and like let her be who she really is within our sessions. But it's very much still a big deal within certain cultures to be gay.
Yeah, I relate a lot to that, Benita. I lived in Armenia for 5 years, and that was this really important experience for me culturally to sort of like connect with like my heritage and like what it means to be Armenian. And it was also this really interesting experience in terms of understanding my own queerness, because it's a really conservative country. Like very few people are out. It's unsafe to be queer there. But there were also ways in which I felt really able to like engage with like my gender in a different way, because like I had always grown up where not very many people looked like me, and then I was like in this country where everybody looked like me and had similar like hair and skin tone and whatever to me. And so there were like leaning into femininity felt really good in Armenia, whereas in the US it always felt like a little bit uncomfortable for me, for example. And so I don't know, I think this like experience of like how we engage with our queerness and our culture is huge. And I think, to your point, that's something that we really have to be aware of when we're working with clients who are questioning or potentially queer, because it's not just about, oh, okay, cool, yeah, like if like know yourself, come out, be happy about who you are. It's like there are so many factors that are contributing to making somebody feel confused or unsure, but then also like around safety and what it means to actually be who they are and whether they should be who they are publicly. I think in the Armenian community, there's a lot of like, don't ask, don't tell. We're going to love you. You're a part of our family, but we're not going to talk about that thing. And I think that is a safety choice that people get to make. And I think it's something we need to understand if clients are making that choice too, that like that might be where they're at, that they can know who they are, but having that experience or that conversation with their family is not something they're ready for or something like that. So it is really complicated, I think.
Yeah, and I again will speak to that. We actually share a client whose background, he is trans or whatever now, but it took him very long to come out as trans and as gay because of his experience dealing with the religious aspect of his parents.
Yep.
And it was hugely not accepted. He got a lot of backlash for it. His parents got a lot of backlash for it. He just was not comfortable coming out at all. Ended up in the hospital like a couple of times, and he actually had a previous therapist that actually blamed his trauma on his orientation and his identity, and had to deal with that therapist for years before he's actually like, now he's in such a better place where, because he does have, now his parents finally accept him. They don't think it's a phase anymore because they had that idea too, where they assumed that it was a phase for just such a long time, even though he wasn't even dropping hints, but he was straight telling them like things like that, like what were important to his identity, and they just weren't listening. And I know a lot of it was based on their religious beliefs and stuff. So
yeah, religion plays a huge role in our clients, whether or not they feel as though they have that safe space at home, whether or not they have that safe space when they're going over their cousin's house, how it is that they want to use their preferred pronouns. I've had a client where she feels as though her mom doesn't care now, just based on the minimal negative comments that mom has been not making anymore. But she still feels as though her mom's not open yet to having a conversation of my client saying, yes, mom, I identify as she, her, he, him. I would like to utilize these both pronouns. And it wasn't until I say after a year of me working with this particular client that she was comfortable. She feels as though she has a safe space when she's in group. And she actually recently just changed or slightly changed her preferred pronouns. As for the last year, it's been she and her, and then now she identifies as she, her, and he, him. But again, that didn't take for a whole year of her being in group, having a mentor who very strongly identifies as gay. I don't hide my appearance. I'm very masculine on the outside. But even then, she didn't feel as though she had that safe space up until a year afterwards for her to be able to just come out and be who it is that he would like to be and how he would like to dress. So it's definitely hard and with our clients when it comes to culture, religion, safe space.
Yeah, I grew up in a big conservative Catholic family, so that was definitely a big part of what hindered me coming out earlier. Like I said, I knew when I was 13, but there was a lot of guilt and a lot of like self-anger and just fear. And I just tried to fight it, and I dated a guy for a long time, just trying to kind of force that lifestyle on myself. So I didn't come out until I was 20. Just took a lot of like really self-exploration and trying to form my own beliefs separate from what was instilled in me growing up. So.
What I've noticed is that all of us have mentioned we didn't come out, we didn't identify, we weren't a part of the community until later in life. Whereas now we see with our clients growing up in this new generation that they are growing up in with social media, with the openness, with the acceptance that they have now. We can see that our clients are identifying as early as 11 years old, some of them, a little bit under 10 years old. And the level of acceptance that they have now and the knowledge that they have was nowhere near the amount that we had growing up at age 10, 11, 12. So I think that is lots of progress in our clients that they get to have now in this community, the queer community, the LGBTQ plus community that they are now a part of along with us.
Especially among their peers, the acceptance level.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's so interesting.
My clients that, they, even with some of them who come from certain backgrounds that are still very homophobic, they hear like from their parents or from older adults, oh, you're too young to realize this, or you're too young to identify as anything, or you're just going through, and that's still something that people are just, they still have that mentality, even though which pushes their kids further and further away. And that can lead to, more extenuating circumstances of like running away, turning to drugs, or, even committing suicide, because that is very huge in the LGBTQ community. And I mean, hopefully it's getting decreased now that it's so widely publicized and more accepted, but it's still a thing that we as clinicians and mentors and things can't really sweep that under the rug, and we have to educate our clients and their parents about, because I think they just don't realize those things still to this day.
I think also like it's that gap between like our generation and the kids we're working with is something that we need to be really attentive to and understand as clinicians, because I don't think that like even if we are super open and are queer ourselves and understand the community, like I don't think we can totally understand what it means or looks like to be queer at like 11 or like coming out at 11, because it's such a different environment. And I see sometimes in my queer and trans clients like that there is this ability to come out earlier, but then sometimes it's like there isn't as much time spent processing like internally what that means or something like that, like and I think with parents or friend groups just wanting to be accepting and not be discriminatory, there's also not conversation as much or something like that. Like I just it's really interesting, because I think it looks so different now that we even kind of as clinicians who are queer like don't always know exactly what they're navigating. And yeah, I think it's also so different for parents, because now parents are more likely to be accepting generally, right? Because it's like more normalized to be accepting of the queer community, but that doesn't necessarily mean they know how to be accepting when it's their own kid. And I hear that so much from my clients, like, yeah, my mom will go to the like pride parade, but it's different when it's me. And like, that's a really also interesting thing for kids to have to navigate, because that makes kids have to think about, well, what's wrong with me if that thing's okay out there, but it's not with me. And I think that plays back into that like internal exploration thing that I'm feeling like therapy can provide the space for, that maybe kids aren't getting when they feel like they should or have to identify earlier or come out earlier or something like that. So I think therapy is this really beautiful place where we can allow for, again, lack of labels, just like exploration of who you are, the possibility of changing your pronouns like from one week to the next, or somebody trying out a different pronoun in therapy that they're not quite using in their everyday life. So I think when I'm thinking about working with like LGBTQ clients, I'm really thinking about, okay, just creating a space for exploration. I think that's a really important part of what we can provide for LGBTQ clients.
Yeah, and I do agree with what Megan said. She said something about feeling guilty for so long. Some of our clients do still have that experience, even though that they're coming out a lot earlier. Again, processing with a elementary school kid who comes out of that but still can't really understand it versus processing it with a teenager are very, very different things. And the level of acceptance within their own household is also plays a huge factor. But again, it goes back to their backgrounds too, and whether or not what their parents believe in, because there are some who feel guilty for being a part of that community, but still haven't come out, but will only come out in like therapy sessions and stuff. But
Right, especially if there's a religious or racial or ethnic background or parental beliefs that make them feel like it's wrong in some way.
Exactly. Or they had that guilt of feeling like they shouldn't have felt guilty at one point because they're in that community. So it's like they had that double guilt of being part of the community, but also feeling like, why was I ever feeling guilty or feeling like that it was a bad thing? Like I should never have felt like that, you know? So and you have to deal with those struggles as a clinician too with your clients to just make them say, no, it's okay.
Right.
I think it also poses this like really difficult thing for us. I was talking with other clinicians about running an LGBTQ like therapy group, but we came into this problem of like, do we name it as that? Because then kids whose parents don't know that they're queer, right, who are exploring that in therapy, don't have the opportunity to access those services. And I think that that's a pretty unique to this community in terms of how we're serving. I mean, other communities as well, but specifically the queer community, there's this like, do people know or do people not know thing, which creates a really specific dynamic when you're talking about therapy, when therapy is about sort of exploring and being who you are and all that stuff. So
I like the one solution that the group that's running now, that they added so that it's an ally group as well, so that everybody can be included and kids can use that if they, if they need to.
Great. Well, to lead into our next question, do you feel your orientation empowers or hinders your interactions with your clients? And as a follow-up to that, do you disclose your orientation?
Good question. So for me, I identify as gay. I'm very, very masculine. I don't hide that in my appearance. I come into sessions wearing a nice button up as a strong female. I go into my family's household when it comes to treatment plan reviews, exactly how it is that I identify on the inside. So for me, I cannot disclose that as my physical appearance, but I also decided to not and for some of my groups and my clients who identify as being a part of the queer community, it kind of gives them that openness of being able to talk about certain subjects of the LGBTQ plus, have that open dialogue in groups when they know that It is like an LGBTQ plus type of session. So speaking of my, work experience and how transparent I am, it has definitely helped my clients feel that safe space right off the bat.
I think it's definitely helped my clients too. When I first started here, one of the first clients I had in the community, I used to have this rainbow lanyard on my keychain. And this particular client would always identify as straight, female. And then I noticed one day she was playing with my lanyard and looking at it and had mentioned the rainbows. And then I guess she was maybe testing the waters, and then slowly she started to come out, and I think that made her more comfortable. I typically don't come out and disclose. However, like when I refer to my wife, it's usually my other half or something like that. Occasionally I'll slip up and say my wife, and it's funny the responses I get. Usually I'm always scared depending on the family I'm working with, but I had one mom actually text me after my session to tell me that she heard me say my wife, and it's okay to say that in front of her kids because she's trying to teach them that there's all types of families. And I was just melted my heart to know that that was there. And occasionally I'll say my wife if I'm with a kid that is struggling or exploring, processing, and it makes them feel a little bit more comfortable opening up.
I've disclosed obviously what it's like in service of the client, like if telling them was, if some kind of anecdote was helpful to them and what they were going through. I'm also, being genuine, I think is very important. I've had clients like flat out ask, so I'm not going to not answer. I also was engaged previously, so, when I just showed up with a big ring, like clients asked a lot of questions. So, it came up a lot then. So I disclose sometimes, but not always. It really just depends. It's never been an issue. I don't just automatically disclose, but when I think it's going to be helpful to them. And I've had clients be very open, just like Paula was saying. Like I've had a mom respond very similarly like that. So.
Okay, so for me, I think it really empowers me as a clinician because I think if I identify with it, I don't always disclose either unless they are struggling and they straight ask me, then obviously I'm going to disclose. But when I do notice that something is really like a struggle for a particular client and it has to relate to their orientation, then that's when I kind of like will go into like a little bit of stuff for me personally, and then it kind of helps them and they're like, oh my God, I love you for saying that, and then it just gets things like a lot like easier for them. So I think it definitely empowers me as a clinician to help and work with that community in particular.
Yeah, I definitely think it makes me a better clinician. I think just simply from having having a lot of different experiences, like I think I can relate to clients who have dated men, and I can relate to clients who have dated women, and I can relate to clients who are dating somebody who's not a man or a woman, and how does that like actually impact how they understand their self and their gender and their sexuality. And I think just like I think also just like having LGBTQ community, like, and being so entrenched in it, there's a lot of things you understand. Like I'm working with one client on what it looks like to do to like have, well, to do HRT, to do like hormone replacement therapy, and then potentially do top surgery. And if I don't think that if I had been a part of the community for so long or had friends or partners who had gone down that road, I would know how to talk about that, or how to just like have it be a regular thing, or have knowledge about the actual like medical part of that, or how parents can feel really complicated about that, or how friends and community and family members might respond to you differently. And so I think I think it provides me with a lot of like life experience and like knowledge and interaction that makes you a better clinician, because I think that makes you a better clinician in general when you have like more experience and knowledge to impart. And then, yeah, I think sometimes in moments of disclosure, that can really help a client feel safe. Like, I think that there are, yeah, I don't think just like run around being like, I'm queer too, but I think that there are totally moments when like, you know, coming out or talking about your own experience really for a client is like, okay, whoa, like I'm just a regular person like my therapist. Like this is a regular thought that I'm having. Like this is a normal experience. And that is really, really powerful because I think a lot of us didn't get that right till our 20s. And so I love when I get to do that with like an 11-year-old because I'm like, hell yeah, you get that at 11? That's awesome. Even if it's only one time from one random therapist. Like, I'm glad that you get that, you know? So yeah.
I want to touch base on what you said about the HRT. So I don't pretend to know everything as a clinician or even being a part of this community. So I actually did reach out to an ex that I had who was a Marine, or is a Marine, I should say, and she at one point in her life did experiencing wanting to transition into a male because, well, because of her background, she came from a very, very religious background, and she was a Marine, and she's an Asian female, gay female in the Marines. So she just had a lot going on, but there was one point where she did want to transition. And one of our clients wants to do the same thing. And I had no knowledge about that stuff at all. So I did reach out to her to kind of understand her experience, just so I could be a better clinician and get a little bit more knowledge for myself so that I could help any other like kid who was going into that idea or had that idea or how they wanted to talk to their parents about it.
Yeah, and it's a kind of, it feels like it's kind of niche knowledge, and I would really encourage like clinicians who are not members of the LGBTQ community to like explore that because, you know, I think plenty of people can be positive therapists and positive role models and, you know, adult figures in queer youth lives, but it does require like looking into some things. You can't just be like, oh, I'm okay with gay people. Like that's not really totally how we're going to provide the best services for LGBTQ clients. It does require clinicians to take some of that responsibility to like do some research, look into it. What does it mean to people? Talk to people. Like, how does it feel? Come out? What are the choices around coming out or not coming out? All that stuff. So yeah, I would really encourage clinicians in the community and out of the community to also like do research into the community. Like, what is that actually? What are some of those things that you might want and need to know? And how can you pursue learning around that? Because even those of us in the community, we only know so much as we've experienced. So we might also need to pursue that knowledge outside as well.
Yeah, Nina, I totally agree. When I first started working here, yeah, I had a mix of clients who were a part of the community, not a part of the community, and so I had mentors as well, you know, that had clients that were a part of the queer community. And there were times where the mentors would approach me and they'd be like, "Hey, you know, I have this one client, and they're like saying that they think that they want to have their pronouns be they them. Like I don't really understand what that means. Like do you mind if?" And I'm just like, oh my gosh, I would love to have this open conversation with you, like because they're not just going to have this knowledge all of a sudden, having that one first conversation with their client, and they can go ahead and research it online. But as we know, like information online can be false and they can be true and it can be all over the place. So I had opened up that that dialogue with that mentor, just be like, hey, anytime you have any kind of questions, you know, in regards to the LGBTQ plus, you know, clients or, you know, anything that you are just like unfamiliar with, like, please come talk to me about it. And, you know, I'm more than happy to kind of educate you in certain aspects that I at least am educated in. And so I've had other mentors approach me as well. So I think that's important, you know, amongst ourselves to tell, you know, have that openness with our colleagues and our other clinicians. Like if they're not knowledgeable when it comes to the queer community, that's okay. They don't have to have all the information. They don't even have to have half of it, as long as they are trying to, you know, trying to understand the community and how that they can better understand their clients as well.
Okay. I wanted to propose one last question. When you're dealing with your clients, what are some of the stigmas around the community that you regularly have to dismantle to try to open them up to be more accepting of themselves and the community?
I think we've kind of touched on this actually, Matt, like that you have to be one thing, that you have to choose, that you have to know right now, when actuality, like gender and sexuality is a spectrum, and they might change how they're feeling right now and later, and they don't have to choose, like they can just be who they are, and they don't even have to decide labels if they don't want to, or they don't have to choose pronouns if they don't want to. Like, what does that actually look like for them? But just making it not, I think that there's just like pressure to have to figure it out. And I think that's something that's really important that we can try and take away from our clients, is like, you don't have to figure it out right now. You have time, like explore. What does it mean to you? Okay, that if it means that to you, then it means that to you. That doesn't mean some larger thing,
I think just being your authentic self all around too, like you don't have to pick a role. Like there's all this idea that you have to be like the masculine one or the feminine one in the relationship, whether it's male or female. It doesn't have to be that way. You just have to be you. There's lots of relationships that don't fit into that stereotype.
I think the only one I've had to actually try to dismantle was the whole phase thing, and that you're going to hell because you are, within that community. So it depends on who I was talking to, if I was talking to the parents or the child, but those are the two that I personally had to deal with to try to dismantle.
So I'm kind of in with everybody else. I feel like it's a little bit of all of those things.
Did we want to talk about tips too, like tips for other therapists?
Definitely, that would be great.
Oh yes, do lots of snaps.
So I think just trying to be careful with pronouns, especially when you're talking about potential partners, like using they, them until they tell you otherwise. Just not assuming when they're talking about their partner or potential partners. You don't want to push them away from talking about their potential partners, and not assuming their sexual orientation or their gender identity. Asking if you don't know, how do you identify? Just being very open. As far as pronouns, what are your pronouns? I think that's the best way to do it. What are your preferred pronouns? Mine, and saying yours.
Mm-hmm.
My preferred pronouns are this. What are yours? And just making it a normal thing.
Yeah, I agree, Megan. And you brought up I had an idea going into it. I was going to say my first and last name. I was going to say my pronouns. And then as live goes on, I forgot. But you brought up a good point, Megan. It is, that very first introductory to family, whether or not that's.
If you just make it normal, then it's no big deal,
Yeah.
I'd say also be careful with names. Do they prefer a nickname? Do they have quote unquote dead name? When my client was transitioning, I had to be really careful because I had been with that client as when she identified as female and had used her birth name. And then, 3 years in, she decides she's transitioning and wants to use a different name. And that was probably one of the most difficult things for me to make sure I kept myself in check.
Yeah, it's hard when they change pronouns to like remind yourself, like even tomorrow, like you are reminding yourself, but it's okay to slip up. You just apologize, as long as you're trying. Asking what do you prefer to be called from the beginning, because that's important for all clients, even just nicknames. Like names are important. They're a big part of how we identify.
I think the other thing that clinicians do have to examine when working with the community is their own biases. So I feel like that's a big tip, that all clinicians need to check before once they do realize that they have somebody within that community that they're going to work with.
One thing we didn't talk about, and this is something I'm passionate about, but I think is a big area of like that's not talked about, is sex education for LGBTQ kids. Like it's just not addressed. Like sex ed is just addressed for straight kids and not for LGBTQ kids. So it's something, I mean, I talk about with all my clients, no matter their sexual orientation, but I think it's particularly important for LGBTQ kids because it's not addressed in school. And I think it's important to talk to them about how to keep themselves safe.
Yeah, I second that, Megan.
Yeah, that's an excellent point to bring up. Okay, well, thank you all for joining us. This concludes our talk on the LGBTQ plus community. Does anyone have any other tips they want to throw in last second?
No, I would like to redo my first point. My name is Tamara Castillo. My preferred pronouns are she and her.
All right, well, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank
Have a
you,
great
Matt.
day.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.